Such difference derive in large measure from the social position agents occupy in relation to one another within the structural process they are trying to change in order to make them less unjust. So two critical elements here is, first of all, there are multiple agents within the system that can be held accountable, or at least that can be held responsible, not accountable. Those are somehow different concepts. So who will be responsible depends on who you are in that system. And the second point is, if we say there are multiple actors within that system that is responsible for injustice, and therefore to bring this reform, then how do we distinguish between these different actors? Then she says we look at their positionality within the social structure, within the structure, where are they positioned? Then the next question is, then how do we define this positionality? That's the question, and she brings 4 parameters of positionality. The first one is power. Power refers to institutions, such as private corporations and companies that do have a financial, but also the leverage and control to influence global as well as national level institutions. Because of their financial leverage, because of the scope economy and the scale that they have across the globe and within countries, then she argues institutions such as, or entities such as corporations, do have the primary responsibility, at least important responsibility, to reform an unjust system if they believe that the unjust system needs to be reformed. Here, what we need to ask ourselves is, as an Oromo, as a society, as also not only Oromo, but the broader south of Ethiopia, to what extent are we making use of economic actors that belong to the society? Are they working to reform, to disrupt the unjust system, or are they silent complicit with the unjust system and hence beneficiaries of that system? If they are beneficiaries, then it's a time to somehow ring a bell and bring them on board so that they start questioning that system. Then the second parameter Young identifies is the privilege parameter. These are actors, both individual institutions or groups, that are not actively involved, for example, in the past historical injustice, but they are beneficiaries of the system because of the group they belong to and where they stand today. So they might claim that, well, this is not a wrong that I have done, so there is no causal link and relationship between what is happening against a group A and me, but they are not perpetrators, but they are beneficiaries. Past injustice put groups on unequal relationship and on unequal footing. Therefore, this privileged position makes them responsible to act to disrupt the unjust system and structure. Then interest targets victims. Now, we often assume victims are actually supposed to be protected and we don't hold them to account. In fact, one of the criticism that is raised against Young's account of responsibility is that this can turn out as a blame game. Not blame game, but as holding the victim to account is adding a burden, additional burden on the victim. But that is not the case, because if we want to assert the victim's agency in the process of transforming an unjust system, then as recipients of the injustice, as a primary recipients of the injustice, then they have the primary responsibility again to speak out, to ask for help, to stand in solidarity, to question that system. And when they do so, individuals by themselves might not have the resource and the capacity to mobilize, which is why then we come to the collective ability dimension of Young, which says that to enable victims, we need those actors, such as associations, professional groups, religious groups, to get on board and enable the victims to act in solidarity and collectively, because those types of associations do have a better leverage and resource to influence the system. And now within this context, we have these four parameters of responsibility within which we all have some place to fit in. So in a way, the kind of responsibility when we think of human rights violation as a systemic challenge is a responsibility that we have to take ourselves. For example, where am I positioned? Am I in the interest parameter? Am I the victim of the system? Or am I in the privilege? Either way, I have to take a step, and that step is a positive step. That positive step is a step to reform the unjust system. And that step is not about demanding a remedy for an individual. Rather, that step is about trying to reform the system, to disrupt the unjust system. And how do we do that? That we have, in fact, existing not only positive but also moral claims such as the right to self-determination. Often people take the right to self-determination by the partial value of the as a political claim, but the right to self-determination is beyond that. The right to self-determination is the right to have an access to the decision-making process, the right to come together to assert one's own interests within that system. And by using this, people can act in solidarity to overcome a process. And this is how I would like to kind of briefly somehow re-evaluate. Yeah, this is not a new notion. Of course, a lot of literatures, both by leading Oromo scholars, but also by non-Oromo scholars have been done. But maybe it's just a reminder that when we speak of human rights violation in the country, putting it in the systemic context might help a little bit in looking at and understanding our situation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I'm sure we'll have some questions for you later. So I'll move on now to welcome our next speaker. He needs to be co-host. So Gemechu Abeshu is our next speaker. So Dr. Gemechu is a racialized refugee researcher currently working as a postdoctoral fellow at York University. He earned his PhD in social anthropology from Bayreuth University in Germany and his MA in governance studies from Antwerp University in Belgium. His research interests include forced displacements, racialized refugees immigration, and emerging non-state forms of political power. He's a research affiliate at the Center for Refugee Studies at York University and the Institute for African Studies at WLU. He's researching the experiences of racialized refugees in Canada. And he is also a co-chair of the Racism and Refugee Subcommittee at the Center for Refugee Studies at York University. So with that, I will give the floor over to Dr. Gemechu.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are tuning from. Can you see my screen? Let me ask that first.
Screen, can you hear us? We see your screen, but you're just not in full screen mode, but we can see you. So if you start your presentation, then it will become full screen.
Okay, let me.
Oh, now we don't see your screen at all.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, and so just as soon as you start your presentation, usually. Now you're in presenter mode, so we are seeing your notes.
I'll just go like this, if it is okay. So first, let me say thank you very much for the invite to speak at OSA's mid-year conference. My presentation is structured to 5 parts. In the first part, I'll briefly speak to provide introductory remarks. which will be followed by a brief overview of the history of Amara settlement in the Western Oromia, in particular emphasis in my case study area. Thirdly, I will speak to the violence against the Oromo, which has been going on since the end of 19th century. The fourth part of my speech will focus on the aim of the Fannon Amara vigilantes in relation to the violence and atrocities currently going on in Eastern Walaga part of Oromia. And finally, I will give a concluding remark, but drawing attention to policy implications. I will start my presentation with the core argument of my presentation, which is Fanno and Amara vigilantes commit violent atrocities and displace tens of thousands of Oromo for one stated political aim, which is annexation of this part of Oromia, and what I and the other speakers call the creation of the Greater Amhara, and which is an extension of the Ethiopian imperial project. And I will also argue that violence is used as an instrument, and which speaks to Cloud's argument that violence is politics or other means. And I will make my argument by drawing data from one specific district called Giddayana or Jiddayana, which is located in East Walaga zone of Oromia National Regional State. As most of you are aware, in recent years, this district has witnessed an increase in both intensity and scope of attacks on civilian population. And as we speak today, out of the 32 kabeles in the district, about 12 of them, Oromo have been expelled from about 12 of them. And there are about nearly 50,000 internally displaced people in and around the district capital. In terms of methodology, this article draws data from secondary sources, available secondary sources, but also from the Uppsala Conflict Data Program, which is a data set with all its limitations when it comes to disaggregation. I think the fact that they have entry about incidents of conflict in Western Oromia in general and in Gidda in particular is something to be recommended. Now, I will go to the history of Amara settlement in Walaga. To understand the protracted attack on the Oromo, I think it is important to look into the history of Amara settlement in Western Oromia. So I will start with a question, when did the Amara settlers come to these areas? And you will see from my presentation this afternoon that the Amara settled in Western Oromia in general and in Jidda Ayana district in particular in 3 waves. The first wave of settlers came during the imperial period, which is from about 1880s, which lasted up to 1974. And initially, Minilik brought Amara settlers who were introduced to the area in the 19th century to pacify the area. And this is a part of the colonial conquest project, a process which has been described differently by different scholars, including as a process of internal colonialism, for instance, by these Donham James, and also as Abyssinianization process. Amara were also settled during Emperor Haile Selassie as part of his settlement policy in the 1970s, and in particular, and worth noting is his 35 development program, which ran from 1968 to 1973, which stipulated the regime's intention of settling northern Ethiopians in the Greater South, but mainly in Oromia. And accordingly, the first settlers came to Jiddayana as part of this policy in 1971, and in a specific place called Gutten, which is currently one of the focal points of the ongoing conflict. The second wave of settlers came during the mid-1980s. You see, in response to the mid-1980s famine, which devastated northern part of Ethiopia, the Derg regime embarked on a plan to resettle nearly 500,000 people from Wallo and the Tigray provinces in those days to Oromia and the Greater South. And as Alula argued, resettlement was seen as one way of putting areas that were labeled as no man's land to use. And you see, Oromo land has been perceived as a no man's land. The third wave of settlers, and which I should underline is a focal point of the ongoing conflict, and which largely is an illegal settlement, came after the 1996-97, a period when a massive land redistribution took place in the Amara region. Bear in mind, these settlers came mainly from Gojam zones. And what is interesting, as I've already mentioned, is this wave of settlement, which is in post-1991 regime, in the post-1991 regime, came against the backdrop of intentional or unintentional discouragement of interregional resettlement. And of course, this massive settlement from the Amara region to Oromia was illegal. According to one study, up to 80,000 illegal settlers have migrated from the Gojam zone to settle in several districts in the then East Wallaga zone, but currently East Wallaga and Oromo Walakeessa, in particular in Jiddayana district, in Kiramu, in Limmu, and Horoguru district. Although they were illegal, the Opidio government bent backward to accommodate the settlers back then. And according to data obtained from the Jiddayana district, for instance, out of the 54 primary schools available in the district currently, 5 of them are Amharic-only schools. And 5 additional schools are Amharic and Oromo. And these are meant to accommodate the interests and demands of illegal settlers. And in almost all of the rural Kabilas where the illegal settlers are currently occupying, the rank and files of state administration are filled by people from the settlers. However, these were not enough for the vigilantes, as their demands are not simple administrative questions. You see, historians have rightfully documented since the conquest of Oromo into the Ethiopian Empire state in the late 19th century, how under the successive Ethiopian regimes the Oromo have endured merciless violence and displacement from the land. So the current conflict in some ways is a continuation of the previous injustices, and the previous speaker alluded to. I'll now list the key recent conflicts in the study area selected for presentation today. The first major conflict took place in 2001, when the settlers rejected the local government administration and demanded a self-rule, which was followed by expelling Oromo from the vicinities. According to US State Department report published in 2001, over 10,000 people have been forcefully displaced due to the violence, and over 500 houses were burned, and more than 3,000 heads of cattle were stolen at that time. During this conflict, and in all subsequent conflicts, the Oromo were outgunned by their counterparts. You see, the successive Ethiopian regimes work in earnest to disarm the Oromo, even from carrying traditional spears, while to the contrary, the illegal settlers were armed to their teeth. This disproportionate armed distribution meant that the Oromo were very easy targets. Let me now skip forward and briefly touch on the recent attacks. In 2021, several rural Kabilas in Jiddayana were attacked. And just to cite few of the most notable ones. On February 13, 2021, for instance, 14 people were killed in Andodedicho, Ali, and Doro Oborra Kabilas. Their livestock were driven away and their houses burned down. On November 25, 2022, Fano killed 12 people, including members of the Oromia police who were on the road going to Kiramu district. On November 29, 2022, another indiscriminate killing took place in Kiramu district with a spillover effect in Jeddah. Fano killed more than 20 people, including Kiramu district police first instance court judge named Damto Gameda. Residents and government officials blame Fano local government level officials blame Fano for this indiscriminate attacks. For instance, Jeddah Yana District Communication Bureau posted a text on their Facebook account as of December 2, 2022, and which reads, "The Amara insurgents, Fano, have launched a military attack on civilians in Kiram district. The 19 villages in the Kiram district of Walakeessa zone have been completely displaced, and many civilians were killed. Most of the displaced have fled to Jeddah Yana district, which is a neighborly district. And currently, the capital of Jeddah Yana district is hosting about 30,000 internally displaced people." On December 3, 2022, the Fano killed 69 Oromo and 13 Tagaru in Gutti. And this includes, and as I've mentioned, I used this in my other presentations as well, members of family of the current Walaga University president, who sadly noted on his Facebook account yesterday, which is in December 3, 2022, in Gutti town, 8 of my relatives, including my brother-in-law, were brutally killed. Currently, as I noted in my introductory remark, out of the 32 Kabales in Jeddah Yana district, Oromo have been completely expelled from 12. It is important to note that Fano and Amara vigilantes attack on Oromo irrespective of their religion or age or gender. Oromoness is the only factor that singles an individual out for an attack. Now let us move to why the Fano and Amara vigilantes. I make this so to say subtle distinction between Fano and Amara vigilantes because Fano mostly cross over from Amara region to Oromia, while the Amara vigilantes are parts of the illegal settlers who reside within Oromia. But they have singularity when it comes to the aim of their atrocities. There are two assumptions that seem to inform Fano and Amara vigilantes mobilization in Oromia. The first assumption, which has been used for decades now, is that the Amara elites regard the Oromo as inferior human beings. So anti-Oromo racism is a fundamental part of their ideology. The second assumption is that they consider Walaga and, for that matter, Oromia as no man's land that is up for grabs and waiting to be colonized. Several studies have documented the responses settlers in Walaga. In response to the question, why did you migrate to Walaga? Most of them replied, Maret Lagna, to colonize land. And this has been documented by various scholars. With these assumptions and addressed with imperial ambitions, the aim of the Fano and Amara vigilantes is for Metakal zone from Benishangul Gumuz, the district of Walqait and Raya from Tigray region, parts of Shwa and parts of Walaga from Oromia to be placed under the greater Amara state, an extension of the imperial project. And this has been clearly stated by their political leaders, and some of whom you can see from my slide now. For instance, Major Daud clearly stated unequivocally that Walaga is an historical territory of the Amara, and therefore Fanos and Amara vigilantes mobilization is a rightful venture. One of the leaders of the Fano and who is currently operating in Walaga made a public statement that this is a statement he made in Bure. Bure is few kilometers away from Kiramu. They say that the Amara went to Walaga in Oromia as if we went to another region. We didn't go to another region. Walaga is our own. It is our own Amara territory before the Oromo came. Walaga used to belong to us, and we will reclaim it. And Fano's voice is an echo of their political leaders. For instance, Major Daud in his interview with Abebe Galau noted, Walaga used to belong to the Amaras. In addition to Walaga, I believe that Amara Fano will also reclaim all the territories that used to belong to the Amara, but currently are occupied by the Oro. And it shouldn't come as a surprise because several weeks ago, the leader, or I should say former leader of the Balderas party, was caught red-handed in Bure town. and he was accused of ideologically brainwashing, mobilizing the Fano to commit atrocities in Eastern Walaga and Western Oromia. Very sadly, also, of course, he was released a day or two after detention. Despite all these atrocities, despite all these decades of violence against civilian Oromos in the area, government officials continue to praise Fano. On December 6, for instance, December 6, 2022, just 4 days after the gruesome attack in Gutin, Prime Minister Abiy delivered a speech at Ethiopian Parliament, during which time he said, Fano is a pride of Ethiopia. They fought heroically and will continue to fight. Fano deserves praise and our utmost respect. Now, the Fano and Amara Vigilante can be understood theoretically speaking as new non-state forms of power. And this has been an emerging area of study in political anthropology, where the understanding is these emerging non-state forms of power operate beside the state, not in contradiction with the state, beside the state, in interlacement with the state, and at times being financed and supported with the state, which is the case in Western Oromia. Now, I will speak to why the Fano are so vicious, and I'll draw on literature to support my argument. A glimpse at the literature shows that the Fano and Amara Vigilante share similar features with other paramilitary groups, such as the Serb militias that fought alongside the Yugoslav government against the Croatian independence, and the Janjaweed militias who fought against the Darfur insurgents in Sudan. The Janjaweed militia forces committed severe atrocities against civilians throughout the conflict. And there is a lot of literature, not just academic, but also from human rights organizations on this one. A striking similarity between the Serbian paramilitary and the Fano and the Amara Vigilantes, in addition to their brutality, is that they both made territorial claims against all their neighboring ethnic groups. The Amara elites currently claim territory from Tigray, including Walqait and Raya, from Benishangul Gumuz, including Matakkal, from Afar and from Oromia, to create the grand ambition of a greater Amara state, which is a contemporary version of the imperial past. But very sadly, these atrocities are rarely reported in international media. The Oromo do not have influential friends in position of power among Oromo government or Western government and the Western media, and therefore the sufferings of the Oromo have received little international attention. This is the hallmark of invisibility at its best. I will try to speak briefly a concluding remark. And my concluding remark goes beyond a simple conclusion to draw attention to policy implications. The natural conclusion that I will draw from my presentation is the fact that the Fano and Amara Vigilantes committed atrocious crimes against the Oromo in Western Oromia with an objective of annexing these territories under the Greater Amara state. Their grand ambition of creating a greater Amara state. But I will be very much interested in drawing policy implications. Short of any political recommendation, which would have been ideal given the circumstances, I will limit myself to speaking to policy issues. The first one, and which I believe should be done as a matter of urgency and a priority, is the need for conducting a landholding inventory in this contentious parts of Oromia. As I've tried to mention in the history of settlement, Amara settlement in Western Oromia, the post-1991 settlers are illegal by definition because there was no state-supported inter-regional settlement program. And therefore, all illegal settlers should be responsibly removed from the lands they currently occupy. And this is not an outlandish claim. As currently, for instance, in Aggar and its surrounding, the state is doing similar things to remove illegal settlers, illegal land occupiers, and to put back the land to the land bank. And illegal settlers are posing, at least in the context of Western Oromia, a security threat, not just to the territorial integrity of the Oromo and Oromia, but also to Benishangul, for instance, and other regional states within Ethiopia. And even the issue, the security issue in Western Oromia could pose a major security challenge in the Blue Nile River Basin, which includes the major mega development project.
Okay, just 30 more seconds we can give you to wrap up, please.
Yeah. The second point is all legally settled citizens within Oromia, in particular in Western Oromia, should be taught about Oromo values. Illegally occupying a territory is very alien to Oromo worldview, and therefore it is my view and policy implication I draw attention to that all legally settled Amhara need to be trained about values of Oromo, of Oromuma, and so that they peacefully and smoothly coexist with fellow Oromos. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. So I'm sorry to share that we are missing two of our panelists for this session. Were unable to join us. So Gamechu Kadir and also Getana Chameda were unable to join for personal reasons, which is why we luckily had some extra time for these previous participants. But our next panelist is Ginbar Nagera, and I will let him introduce himself. So go ahead, Ginbar, whenever you're ready. You're muted now. You're still muted. So we cannot hear you. Can you hear us, Ginbar? So we still cannot hear you. I'm trying to unmute you, but it's not successful. Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Now we can hear you. Wonderful.
Okay. Do you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you for the opportunity. My presentation is on one of the Karaju heroes, Arole Fiche, a symbol of resistance and heroism in Karaju. I begin with introducing the Karaju. Karaju belonged to the Barentuma Confederacy and organized into the Baso and the Dulecha. They claimed that they shared the ancient Oromo mood and the Gada centers such as Mormor, Madolabu, and the Fugu were their ancestral land as well. Karaju then, since the last quarter of 16th century, established themselves in the late Gada assembly at Malka or Tarre Lady and Malka or Tarre Lugo, formerly Malka, but since the 1960s named as Tarre. You have other historical landscapes such as Horasama, Oda Kalala, Jirenkara, and Moto Makorma. Introducing the Karayu further, the Karayu are the guardians of ancient Oromo values, described as Ummata Horte Ganama, or people of the origin, because of their adherences to the Wakefana, Gada system, pastoralism, Karrayu are still wearing the white kilt or martuadi, and then for their gumfra hairstyle, mimics of the Oda tree. Really, this is a part, the next is a part regarding Karrayu account of resistance. Historical record that tells us that the Karrayu have come under a persistent victimization by the neighborhood Shawan Amara since the 18th century and their allies of the Ethiopian states as of the last quarter of the 20th century. So the Shawan Amara were an old force of the Karrayu, and they gave rise to Emperor Menelik, who conquered the Karrayu land in 1887 or 88 and achieved their long goal plans. Or the state and its allies drives for repressing the Karrayu have been evicting them from their lands, abandoning Gada system or abandoning them the Gada system, Wakefana and the Oromoma for the grand Amaranization and the supremacy of sedentary agriculture, weakening their military courage. As Ababahire himself described, the Karrayu were most powerful and aggressive fighters of Oromo branches. Here is a sort of outline, which really then helps me to how really the resistances and the account Karrayu has come through. It is among the combatants between the Karrayu on one hand and their neighborhood, the Shawan Amhara. In 1705, Nagasi Christos drove the Karrayu from the main highland of Bulga, when the Karrayu Gada leader Burga Fantale killed the confrontation. In 1712, Sebisti again attacked the Karrayu. In 1745, Abije fought with the Karrayu at a place called Barri Akko or Ankober, and Abije killed in the confrontation by the Karrayu heroes. 1800, Amha Jesus attacked again, similarly attacked the Karrayu, importing modern weapons from Gondar. 1820 and 13, Haile Selassie launched 2 campaigns against the Karrayu, where really when he looted nearly 18,000 Karrayu cattle. 1815, similarly, Menelik then looted 16 Karrayu female and the children. Later, Karrayu released with 100 fattened bulls. Karrayu again confronted with Ethiopian state or government since Menelik conquest. 1887 or their conquest by Menelik, when the Karrayu then mutilated and their breast is cut off. In the 1890s and then 1894, Das Mangesha Atkan was one of general in Battle of Adwa, launched that is a consecutive 3 or 4 years attacks against the Karrayu, with the Karrayu called Lola Bodda and the Lola Naba Bochata. He looted the Karrayu cattle. And the consequence of the Karrayu says, remembered this confrontation as Gaha Karrayu Kachenga Babat or Gaha Irumte Karrayu Famte. In 1999, they just after Mariam took a land between them, really country confronted for 2 days with the imperialist. Again, 1925, 27, 29, 31, the Karrayu confronted at Lola Bodda, Lola Gala, Lola Hallam, Lola Imbiba, where when the Karrayu confronted against the state allies. In 1935, Karrayu were really then severely beaten by Bakala Basha, an imperial army at Asiasak. Bakala mobilized nearly 700 well-armed army against the Karrayu. He himself was said with modern brain, like which the Karrayu call matresi. Similarly, Italian administration disarmed the Karrayu. Haile Selassie then persecuted the Karrayus 2 times, 1941 against 1970 at Matahara in public. Here is an outline table which shows major incidents of battles since 1890s. Here are a list of battles which my Karrayu informants told me are related, persecuted, and persistently attacked by Ethiopia, the state, and its allies. The Karrayu have been prey to the coming and the going regimes, deliberate repression, alleged beautiful, persistent, and extinction. Their struggling for survival under the persistent attacks has shaped the Karrayu account of oppression, resistance, and heroism. So their self-defense valor forced the cultivation of heroisms and venerated heroes like Arole. Karrayu really then in superseding the Barenttu Confederacy in the 16th century, whom Babaira himself mentioned them as the most bravest and fighting class, are nowadays portrayals of marginalized. So they are really then overlooked in Oromo scholarship, national patriotism, literature, and art or music due to little research access. The methodology I used is historical. Particularly, my informant are the living witness of their history or my history. It is a military structure or a sort of a structure which shows you how the Karrayu were militarily organized under their Gada system, which is led by the Ababoko. The Bawarana is accountable to lead the general military divisions. The Jajabi is a police department, and the Waratoma are those who are guarding the Ababoko and the seat or center of political administration. The Karrayu again have their own military code and the principle. The military principle indoctrinates that the Karrayu never withdraws from an enemy, never subdues his position to rivals. The military motto stubborn is pledged to Mada Commando. Karrayu always, they say, fight always your enemy anterior, and they die step forward. Karrayu again use motto as Tarre Radinan Desanor. The Karrayu never retreats an enemy from a Tarre or an assembly unless to die on it. So again, they adopt the philosophy of keeping female children all beyond the war zone. Here is a military structure adopted among the Karrayu. The Karrayu have a common fighting class. All Karrayus engaged in fighting as long as they are very few in number. And then almost annihilated through this historical lectures and war of annihilation launched on them. The special fighting class are Lencha Karrayu, or like the commandos. The next is the Kondala or the Abamriga, and the most bravest and the one who collected more trophy is said as Abba Bitao, or superhero. But with the braveries and the super military titles in Karrayu is Kondala. In the conventional Gada system, Kondala is a fourth age grade. Babahire mentioned Kondala were an armed section. Similarly, the Karrayu Kondala stands for someone of best warrior and rewarded in troop. The Lenchota Karrayu are the lions of Karrayu, refer to those who are roaring like lions and upsetting fear on their enemy. These are here is photos then I took in 2008 in Tarre Tututi. These are the Kondalas on military spectacle. So see the Kondalas with female or women attire or clothes. What really distinguishes heroes or Kondala in Karrayu? The Karrayu say that Kondala or hero is born naturally. Is someone who naturally born. The heroes and heroically die. Hero buried in a special place or a particular site, on his hero is on whose burial site grass grows. The cattle then graze that grass. Then the cattle gives milk. The one who drink that milk always grows to be hero. So this is how the heroism is cycling and the recycling in Karrayu. The Kondalas are again distinct for their military decorations. they wear the bobesitu, it's a red string tied on their head, the jano, the bircha, the bali, and the bayu. Here are clothes which really distinct and only worn by the Kondala, and which distincts them from common fighting and non-Kondalas. Kondalas are distinct for their because of their military technologies. They always wear shelled spear or guns. Kondalas are the more rewarded classes who really then bore materially as well as socially. They are pride of their people. The first being a good warrior fuses fear and the left psychological impact against an enemy camp. Their prerogatives of Kondala, they are always entitled to take best food. Their achievement is recited through Farsa and the Gerarsa, move the people with tears of joy, and these are really then the prerogative to which the Kondala is entitled in Kerala. Who really then Arole Fiche. Arole is said to be born in 1880s and died in 1976. Arole was an extraordinary full life fighter and who collected 6 trophies in life. He's said to be having involved in 12 of the major battles, Karayu for its Ethiopia and the state and its allies, and he wounded 9 times. He was a Bajajabi during the 1923 to 1930s. This was based on the Geda timetable or chronology. He became the Bawarana, commander-in-chief of army of 46 Michile Party. He won again for the position or office of Abatoma as well. He was the best advisor on military and security matters after he joined the Luba or after 1946. He extraordinarily led the Karayu fighters on several emergency confrontations. He also frequently chosen among his peers, friends, and clans for surprise attack. Arole recorded for his relentless bravery, military tactics, determination, the quality of to organize fighters and manipulating horse. Karayu fight on horseback until the 1960s and 70s. He was known by his horse named Rebu and Abba Rebu. He was the best trainer of youth on the management of horse, spear management, swords, and others. Arole is again the equivalence of other extraordinary heroes of the Karayu. Eragilo, his best fighter and his best friend, Antale Bukuri, who said to have smashed 3 enemies in one battle. Tisa Wako, Awas Jidda, Awas the one who killed Bakala Basha and confiscated his matresi or Sebrel gun. Then Arole recalled for his extraordinary achievements on the day of Lola Galcha in 1931. On the day when the Karayu fighters returned from combat, they found an enemy ambushed under the tree. No one really then dared to challenge except Arole. So he chased that enemy and dragged him from his horse. So he is remembered as Galchandari Lafa and the following song. Galchandari Lafa Aradda Onasumale, Ichiki Fiche, Fardarra Fardati Utale, Rada Kitteloni, Fardan Fardakabe, Arole Fiche. Arole is remembered with his deeds on the day of his active Gada power, 1939, when Arole confronted on the day, while heroes from all over Baso Dulacha Moitis made war enchantment at Tarrelugo. Then Arole confronted and queried all of them, saying, "Have you conquered the horse? Did your horse capture an enemy's horse or horse by horse?" There was nobody that matched him from the entire Karayu land. He remained to be a matchless hero. This is Kaba, a monument built for Karayu, built for Arole in 1976. Arole is the only hero for whom Karayu built such memorial tombstone. For the trophies, 6 trophies he collected. And as you see from the photo, 2 of the longest on left and the sides are their heroes like Arole himself. The remaining were common fighters. So he did it as 6 trophies. Arole's and Onu's monuments still the sacrificial honor is made. The youth go to that site and pay sacrifice in goat or sheep or many bulls then slaughtered in the name of Karrayu. So for his achievement and the contributed deeds, he is remembered in praising songs as Ichiki fiche gonni maqala fatti ise ori'a boda kaaba sadawwate ciise. So this is users are always encouraged to listen heroic stories and continuously thoughts about the deeds of these celebrated warriors like Karrayu. This is a conclusion. Karrayu experienced the state and it is lies victimization, land confiscation, looting victims and livestock and slaying their great fighters. They are also struggling to survive dry and arid ecology of Antalle area following their eviction from Awash Valley. The result of this persistent war, really they give you an example, a tangible example. The Baso Moiti Melba party, Boku family has totally lost its Boku family and its office for last party tenure, 2009-11 to 18 was almost Baku. Baso Melba party has not totally lost its Boku family because of these persistent attacks and wars on Karrayu.
Just a 2-minute warning.
Yeah, I'm finishing. 1930s, near to 40 to 50 members of the Michilde party were encircled and slaughtered at one day. Only 5 to 7 were saved from the massacre. Nonetheless, Karrayu deserved to maintain Gada and Wakefana without yielding to Amaranization, Christianization, as well as Islamization. The Oromo history of resistance against prejudices, the Karrayu would come in first line, firmly sustaining Oromma and unyielding to an aligned influence. Survival became possible through the reliance on Gada's strong institutional support and their strong determination, their adherence to Wakefana, the consciousness for Oromumma, strong internal solidarity, drawing on proven military organizations and their strategies. However, the Karrayu's stamina has faced challenge since very recently because of the increasing state annihilation, drought, and the change in agency. Since 1970, when the Karrayu are in need of crisis, certain governmental actors in the name of humanitarian access use the vacuum as an opportunity to dunk their creeds, to weaken the Gada values. So this is the recommendation that I made. The Ethiopian government should restrain itself from annihilating the Karrayu who are under existential threat. Again, strategy of using Afan Oromo as a church language and encouraging the youth to rebel over deserting ancestral value of Gada and the Oromumma needs to be halted. The Council of Aboti Gada and the secular institutions like OSA need to boldly speak on such religious imposture and establish a strong agency, design a strategy safeguarding Oromumma. Arrole's monument, which could be the first memorial for Oromo heroes, stands in an open space, has not fences in the protected so that it could be easily affected. So the Fantale district culture and tourism shall establish a protection strategy to conserve this the monument. Here is a dedication page, tribute to the Lake Ababoku, Kadro Hawas. I owe and give Fanna or Wakefana according to religious rule to the late Ababoku, Kadro Hawas and his cabinet of Michilde party. This acknowledgement, I acknowledge Hawas Roba, and Hawas Meto of Karrayu's nephew, and the Ilman Karrayu in abroad, particularly Walakeessa Bara and Hawas. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kinbar. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, and our final panelist for today is Marga Thekaru, who I believe is already here. So Marga is a lawyer by training. He holds an LLM Master's in Human Rights Law and LLB degree in law, both from Addis Ababa University. Currently, he is a lecturer of law at Waldaa University. He's participated in various research and has published 4 articles on different topics. He also considers himself a human rights advocate working with CSOs on human rights issues. So we are happy to have you, Marga. Share zone. Okay, so can you unmute yourself, Marga, so we can test?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah, I am really honored to be a part of this conference. It is my first time to participate in OSA's conference. And today I'm going to present on the Ethiopian judiciary plight and right of Oromo political prisoners, a critical analysis of some cases. So to begin from from the definition of the phrase political prisoners, political prisoners are those who are detained in against the violation of international human rights law, and in some cases because of their political views or their membership to ethnic groups, nationality, or based on their language. So I adopted, I took this definition from two organizations definitional thing, which is Amnesty International and
Really
European.
quick, sorry to interrupt, but can you make your slides full screen, or can you just zoom in a little bit so we can see it larger? Sorry. So just in the bottom right-hand corner, I think if you can make your zoom, yeah, just to 100% or as big as you can. Okay. Yeah, I think wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So political prisoners are those who are detained or arrested against the violation of international human rights law, and having political view is not necessarily a criteria because the way the government or the security forces perceive a person matters. Especially in Oromia, people are detained not simply because of their political views, but because of their membership to Oromia, Oromo or Oromo ethnic group or Oromo nation. By saying this, I will go to the objective of the article, and the article has two objectives mainly. It examines the human rights situation of Oromo political prisoners, and it also examines the state or the position of Ethiopian judiciary from political prisoners' perspective. And the research adopted a kind of mixed doctrinal and non-doctrinal legal research method, and uses qualitative research approach in analyzing the data. And international and national legal instruments are analyzed, primarily the cases, court cases, and international human rights laws such as ICCPR, the FDR Constitution, and all other laws. Secondary sources are also consulted. Reports from NGOs, media outlets, books, and articles were utilized, and the conclusion of and the recommendation of the article is informed by this data. So coming to the human rights framework in which we study prisoners' right, political prisoners' right, we have UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, ICCPR, Convention Against Torture, African Charter on Human and People's Rights, Convention related to the forced disappearance of people, and other international instruments such as guidelines that is adopted by African Union. More or less, Ethiopia is party to all of them, and
You've muted yourself somehow. We cannot hear you. Can you? Oh, perfect. Thank you.
yeah, I'm sorry. So these are the international instruments from which we derive political prisoners' rights. In addition to this, there are in international human rights law, we have entitlement to fair and public hearing as independent and human right by its own rights. So getting your case heard by impartial and independent tribunal by itself is a right. So this requires the independent judiciary and the impartial judges who entertain the cases. So when we say judicial independency, it can be measured against the quality of lawyers or judges that handle cases, and the financial and the political autonomy of the courts. On top of this, the finality of the court decision, the fact that the decision passed by court are final and not subjected to revision by other branch of government, also is one of the manifestation of an independency of judiciary. We're coming to the context of political prisoner, and from starting from the historical perspectives, Oromos are subjected to marginalization, subjected to economic, political, and other marginalizations and exclusions since their subjugation and annexation to the Ethiopia by use of forces by the Minilik. And we have many of sources on this regard. They are marginalized and oppressed, and it continued under the successive Ethiopian regimes. We have human rights violations targeting Oromo politicians and Oromo elites during Haile Selassie's regime, and as cited in Professor Asafa Jalata's article, Mamo Mazammar and Haile Mariam Gammada, where Oromo elites were subjected to illegal arbitrary detention and other human rights abuses during Haile Selassie's regime. And during their regime also, there were systematic oppression and repression of Oromo society, Oromo nation under the Red Terror campaign. And it is also continued during the EPRDF regime, which labeled the whole Oromo nation as OLF and detained in mass and the torture and extrajudicially killed in thousands. So it is a continuation, in fact. And here I want to cite the recent Jawar Mohammad's note, which characterizes the name under which Oromo have been suffering from the inception. So Shifta during the Haile Selassie regime, Wombade during the Darg, and the terrorists during the EPRDF regime, and the Shane during the PP regime. So when we see the trajectory, it is a continuation, and the Ethiopian empire was targeting and eliminating and as well oppressing the Oromo nation and its elites. In 2080, the PP regime, which came into power based on the Oromo revolution or Oromo protest, youth protest, tried to make some reforms, some legal and institutional reforms, which include the revision of anti-terrorism proclamation, election proclamation, and the media laws. Institutional-wise, there were an attempt to revise the election board and the Human Rights Commission and other institutions, including courts. There were reports that claim over 3,000 of political prisoners were released during that time. The political space was said to be widened, and some political labeling was lifted from OLF and Gimbot Sabat at the time. But this didn't last long. While 3,000 prisoners released, the Abiy regime or the PP regime arrested tens of thousands of Oromo politicians, or some even not politicians, the ordinary citizens as well. And so what we see from this is that it can be concluded by this maxim, which says the more it changes, the more it remains the same. The situation, there were attempts to reform the law, the institution, but it is still the same. And coming to the plights of Oromo political prisoners and in Ethiopia, mass arrest is common. People are detained even in schools because the prison facilities were not enough to hold the large number of Oromo political prisoners. And we have both unofficial and official prison centers in Ethiopia. And currently, as reports claim, we have tens of thousands of political prisoners. These are those who registered, some of them, and this is the situation. And what are the causes for the arrest in Ethiopia? Having the link to OLA, this is a name or the pretext under which everybody can be arrested on his way. And having relatives who are a member of OLA, this is the main cause. You know, as many of you can remember, the OLA leader, Jalmaro's family was intimidated and harassed simply because they are the parents of Maro. And the local militia detain youth, checking their ID. You know, in some cases, they want to know your locality, from which part of Oromia you came. And because of your locality, you can be subjected to imprisonment. Local militia also can detain you if they want some sort of money from you. And if you have a personal conflict with them, this can be, a person can be ended up into jail because of these factors in Oromia. And as the Ethiopian law says, criminal responsibility is personal, and there is no need to imprison parents for the crime of their relatives, if it is a crime at all. And to categorize the plights of Oromo political prisoners into these thematic areas, extrajudicial killing is rampant, enforced disappearance is common, violation of right to fair and public hearing, torture and inhuman treatments are the major right violations that the people are facing in prison. So coming to the extrajudicial killing, human right to life is protected under international law and Ethiopian domestic laws as well. And hundreds of political prisoners are executed after they removed from the place where they detained or arrested. We have many reports, as I collected, from civil society organizations report, including OLA and OSG and HALA. We have Abdi Ababe. He was a freshman university student and executed in Amuru after detained for 3 or 2 days, I think. Damiso Moisa was also disappeared at the first and executed later. And the Emmanuel Wendimu's case is very common. I think you all know it. And the government's officials are proud about the execution of this guy. They publicly executed in Dambidono. So in addition to this, I had the opportunity to participate in a workshop prepared by local NGO in Ethiopia, and the participants were from Guji, from East and West Guji zones, and they told us that there is a place specifically called Kera and the Network. These places are notorious places where the people were the political detainees or arrested persons taken and executed if they went the security personnel went to execute them. This report is also corroborated by Amnesty International report of 2029. Two minors, Abdullah and Deganke, was executed after they removed from detention centers. And according to international law, minor cannot be subjected to capital punishment even if the court cannot even decide their execution. The other one is enforced disappearance. This is common, and a single person can be subjected to multiple enforced disappearance at a time. So it is well known when it comes to OLF and OFC leaders and members. Due process of law is violated, and this includes the detention from the very outset. The people arrested against the violation of law without having court warrant. It is common. So no one is entitled to ask the court order from the security person. After the detention, they denied of the right to be presented to court within 48 hours. And when it comes to the bail, firstly, the amount the court decide is exaggerated, and it ranges from 25,000 to 50,000 per person. And the sad part is after they pay this amount of money, the security forces either lodge an appeal against them or wait them at the gate of the prison and take them, rearrest them, and transfer to another prison. This is what is commonly practiced in this country. And even the security personnel or the prison administration people can refuse the court order and keep the political prisoner in prison despite the court order. And finally, no one can get the back payment, the payment that they pay for their bail. And when we see this, it seems like that the government is using as a revenue generating mechanism and economically empowering the political prisoners. I am saying this because many of the political detainees here are, some of them are students, recent graduate, and the other are those who lived whole of their life for the struggle Oromo cause, for the Oromo cause in other countries. So when the court decide 50,000 birr to them, it's a bit difficult to afford. It amounts to denial of the bare rights. The other human rights violation is torture and inhuman treatment, and in international law, torture is strictly prohibited. Even during a state of emergency, no one should be inhumanly treated or tortured. But this is common, and I have a list of survivors of torture and inhuman treatment. Some of them are in this country and some of them abroad, living in exile. So we have Rabra Wirtu, Mangistu Akma, Muhammad Dexiso, Kulani Bagre, who was still in prison, and the court convicted her. But she's suffering a health problem, which is due to the torture.
Just to give me 2 more minutes, please, to wrap up.
Okay. So Galan and Sololia, Galan, Sololia, and Awash Malkasa are the centers, the new center serving as torture center for this regime. And denial of human medical treatment is also one of inhuman treatment in prison. The other important thing is that the role of the court and the the courts are usually regarded as the guardian of human rights. They protect citizens from excessive use of force from executive side. But in Ethiopia, courts are so weakened they cannot even enforce their order. The police, the ordinary police, is can refuse the court order to execute the court order by citing the order from above. You know, we have order which is above court order. These orders are usually from police commission or security forces. And coming to the conclusion, Oromo political prisoner has been subjected to right abuses, as I have just mentioned, which include extrajudicial killing, torture, inhuman treatment, enforced disappearance, and other abuses. These violations are systematic and gross, and the Ethiopian justice system is not working. The courts are not independent, and they cannot even execute their order. So the targeting of Oromo politicians is not something that started during PP's regime. Rather, it is a continuation of a colonial project, which started from since the colonization of Oromo land by Minilik. So the problem is inherent to the structure of the state. The state by itself, it's not the government, but the formation of the state by itself is a problem. So as a recommendation, there is a need to renew the social contract via mechanism of either referendum or political transition, which must be followed by transitional justice to ensure accountability and redress victims. And the right violation in Oromia is invisible. They are underreported. I know some of the NGOs, civil society organizations based in Ethiopia and abroad are working, but it is still underreported. The international community is not working on it. Therefore, radicalized advocacy and accountability measures are required. Working with UN and African Union Human Rights Agency helps as well. And the other important thing I suggest here is the strategic litigation of cases at African Human and the People's Commission, because Ethiopia is party to the commission, the charter, and the commission has the mandate to entertain cases. This is expected from civil society organizations. And finally, I suggest that there is a need to have a vibrant civil society organizations, and empowering the existing one is a solution. It contributes. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. So now we will begin with the Q&A, and same as previously, we will begin with participants in the room, and then we will take questions from the Zoom participants. So if you are on Zoom, feel free to write questions in the chat now, but we will begin in the room. So any questions for our panelists? Okay, so.
Thank you. I would like to have a question to Dr. Gamacho. He has stated that Amara elites claim that certain parts of Oromia are parts of Amara or Amararist. When, for example, Dawit Georgis unequivocally states that Walaga is Amararist now, Walaga is Amara's land, is there any grain of evidence that Amaras ever lived in Walaga before the colonial invasion by Nugus Tekle Haymanot and later Minilik? And the second, maybe, how are who is going to remove these illegal settlers? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question. Do you want to go ahead and respond, or should we collect a few questions first? Why don't you go ahead and respond if you seem ready to add.
First of all, let me say thank you very much for a very timely question. And I think the question more than an answer, I'll leave it on the table for everyone. There are no historical, I'm not an historian, I will not claim to be one, but there are no historical facts to speak to the idea that the Amara have historically dominated that area. These are what anthropologists call the invention of tradition, the invention of narratives to justify a political objective. And this is not specific to Walaga, as I've tried to allude to in my presentation. The Amhara elite have territorial ambition to take territories from all their neighboring regional states in Ethiopia, not just in Ethiopia, actually, even in Sudan and in Djibouti. So these are invented narratives to justify the political objective, to resuscitate their imperial project. But it is also informed by a very racist idea that any land outside of Amara regional state is a no man's land. And therefore it is a no point for them whether they have lived in those lands before or not. And this has informed all the successive policies introduced by the Ethiopian government. That, for instance, land in Oromia is a no man's land. It is a marginal land. It is unused land, despite the fact to the contrary. With that, I will leave it on the table. I'm hoping others to intervene as well, and hoping for historians to respond as well. The argument about who should remove, and there is one point which I haven't included in my presentation today. In 2001, when the first major conflict broke out, I was born in Jeddah, or Jeddah. So I remember, and the head of Oromia Security Bureau came, and he realized that the third wave of settlers, all of them are illegal settlers, by the way, and there shouldn't be any question about that. These are illegal settlers, and there are no justifications to the contrary, despite the fact that there are ways by which they manufactured documents to claim that they are legal settlers. They are illegal settlers. So there was an attempt by Ethiopian government, Oromia regional government itself, to push for a sort of managed removal, which costed his position. I forgot his name. Jonathan Dipesa, yes, Jonathan Dipesa tried to introduce, having seen on the ground the realities. He tried to introduce that, but I think it costed him his position, and he had to flee the country. But this has to be done as a matter of security necessity, to be honest, as a security necessity. Nobody knows the exact number of illegal settlers in Eastern Walaga, in Western Oromia. Nobody knows, and they are not under state administration, and it has to be done. When I spoke about my conclusion, I started by saying short of political recommendation, because we can have a long discussion about policy discussions here, but the anchoring point will go back to the politics. Unless the politics is corrected, unless Oromia is ruled by a legitimate government, we can have as many lists of policy recommendations as possible, but nobody to implement them. So it has to be done, but it has to be done by a legitimate government, Oromia government. that's what I will say, but I will leave the discussion back on the table. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Did any of the other panelists want to respond to that question, or should we take a new question from the audience? Okay, let's take one more from the audience. Sorry, I saw Obugazao first, and we'll take yours next. Okay, we'll come to your comment after, if that's okay.
All right, yeah, I would like to thank all presenters, and really it is well presented. But I have some clarifications, actually, if you be able to do that. First of all, I would like to thank Bene for your presentation. Well, with the kind of justice, and you categorized justice into moral and legal. And at the same time, you told us that who is responsible for the violation of human rights, and then you categorized four categories, if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me. Power, privilege, interest, and collective ability. So what my question is, where does the Ethiopian politicians or Oromos lie in this one? Because I didn't see anything where they are actually, where they belong, or how do they act in these categories, in these four categories. The other one is actually goes to the history of migration. I don't know who was that. Maybe Gamacho, I think. You told us at the same time. I have a parallel question with the previous one. Well, you told us about the historical background of settlement, but your main discussion was based on settlement and violation, I think. And I didn't hear much from the violence perspective, whether you have explored something. Is there any historical background of the violation acted upon the Oromos around there? Say, for instance, in my lived experience, I can see in 1994, the Galla Gadai movement. And at the same time, from that Galla Gadai developed into the current Fano. And if you have come across those facilities which helped the Fano, such as the Orthodox Church, as a store of armament, have you ever actually come across this evidence in your research? And the other one is, well, I would like to thank Gumbar for his presentation. Really, I have no comment, or I have no question regarding that. Regarding the Gada, sorry, the Karayu.
Okay, why don't we pause there, Obugazao? That's we'll pause and have a response from those questions, and then we'll go forward.
I'd like to piggyback onto the question for Kabane. Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. You made a legal distinction between those who are accountable and those who are responsible. So the question was about the responsibility, and I'm interested in the distinction that you make there. What is the significance of that legal distinction?
So go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are all great questions. So, and a bit philosophical. So maybe I'll start with the last one, with Bonnie's question. So the divide between accountability and responsibility, both in the legal but also political philosophy, is still debatable. But the very generalistic response to that would be, when we speak of accountability, it is often in the legal category of holding somebody to account. And to account is to demand. It can be in a form of compensation, for example, or in a form of demanding them to stop a certain form of wrongful behavior. And these forms of accountability are usually decided by the courts of law. So the court can pass a verdict or a decision that requires a person to take a certain measure with regard to his or her wrongful behavior. And now I used Young's account of responsibility versus accountability. So when she defines the divide, she puts this: if we are speaking about accountability, then that is a legal accountability, which requires compensating and at least taking some sort of action to remediate the wrongful behavior. But then if we are talking about responsibility, it's not necessarily, first of all, it's not about blaming the actor or the wrongdoer. Rather, it's about requesting and collaboratively asking that agent to somehow amend and revise the wrongful behavior. In this context, it's not about demanding compensation, for example. It's not about undoing the past injustice. Rather, it is about looking forward for a better future to improve the existing system together, collaboratively. So this is what the kind of differentiation Young draws. So the forward-looking element of responsibility, and then the backward-looking aspect of accountability. But as I said, it's quite debatable. So the space is still under debate, but this is the divide. And my presentation was more inclined to the responsibility aspect than the accountability. I don't know if that answers, but yeah. That maybe I'll pass to the first question. So I think the first question has two aspects, if I understood this correctly. So the divide I drew between moral and legal isn't just about justice. I was more about human rights. When we see and understand human rights, there are two dimensions of understanding human rights. One is human right as a legal claim, which is a positivist thinking and a positivist school of thought. So human rights emanates from the written law, from a written treaty. That is the legalistic thinking and understanding of human rights. And the second category, the moral claim, is the naturalist school of thought thinking and understanding of human rights, which claims that human rights goes beyond the positivist law. It is a fundamental right that we have by being just a human being. So our humanity enables us to have that right, and it's a right that is not something that we claim or demand from a government. We have it by being just a human being. So that's the divide, and justice follows that. Then comes the question of justice. When we demand justice, if we follow the positivist thinking and the legalistic claim, then we follow the procedural requirement of like the judiciary in those things. But then if we base our argument and claim on the moral angle of human rights, then it goes beyond that. Of course, recognize the role of judiciary, but it goes beyond that. So that is the kind of line I wanted to draw. The second dimension of the question is really difficult. I think, where do we stand? Like, where do the Oromo politicians stand in those four parameters? So I would ask two questions for this. I mean, which politicians? That is really critical question. Whom are we talking about? Because there are several actors, there are several politicians. So depending on the position they occupy, for example, some of them, they are in a power position. Oromo has been, part of an Oromo has been in a certain form of power position since the historical period until today. Then, so the kind of responsibility for those groups will be somehow they have the resource and also the leverage and control to influence the existing system, because they are actually part of the system. So they have the larger responsibility. But then there are also Oromo politicians who are also at the victim category, right? And then we can also think of their responsibility based on interest as recipients of the injustice. Then they have the responsibility to coordinate their effort and also raise a demand and against the system. The same thing with collective action, the collective capacity. So I would say the place of the Oromo politicians at the intersection of all those parameters, and it's difficult to identify just one and say this is their place. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for that response. Shall we go to Gamechu? I think you had some comments.
Yes, thank you. Very, very good questions again. I will start with the last question about the role of the church. And I would like to put that in a bigger context, how the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is related within the bigger Ethiopian imperial political project, even in the contemporary discourses. And Western Oromia is no exception in that regard. I can give you an example where Ethiopian Orthodox Church is a party siding with the Fano Amara vigilantes. Real lived experience example I will give you is from 2001. People who are from that area, who follow events from that area, will all remember when the a church in at Ayana, which is a capital of Gidda, where a number of arms were found within the church compound, which resulted in actually detention of several of the clergy. And this will not be an isolated event. So it has to be understood with the bigger historical but also contemporary context of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church relationship with the Ethiopian imperial past or current Ethiopianist ambition. So they have a part in it. The issue of how the Amara vigilantes Fano metamorphosed over time, it is true. When it started, there were several groups who operate with different names. I know, for instance, the case for Galagadai, who were financed and armed with business owners, for instance. And this very rampant in the first round of the conflict, by the way. And even there were academics who tried to justify the position of legal settlers. I don't want to name names today. For anyone who is interested, I will give you the name of some of the books that were published to justify the narrative of the illegal settlers. But around 20 years ago, when it started with the kinds of the Galag. Over time, it's kind of evolved into Amara vigilantes. And it's very recently that we have, and I want to make that distinction. The Fano are armed groups that are trained in Amara or even beyond. And now there are claims that they were even trained in Eritrea, trained and financed, and were sent to Oromia with a clear political objective, with clear political purpose, to clear Oromo of this land and annex these lands part to the Amhara. And they work in collaboration with Amara vigilantes. These are armed groups from within the illegal settlers. And then you have if you want to make a finer, subtle distinction, the Galagada actually are those who came decades ago, descendants of those who came decades and decades ago, and who kind of form a collaboration with the other groups with the same objective of creating an Amara domination in that region. So it has metamorphosed over time, but the objective remains the same. The actors have changed their names, the objective has remained the same. What is really sad, actually, is how both the Oromo National Regional State and the Ethiopian federal government work in collaboration with these groups to displace the Oromo. And you remember one of the quotations from Fikadu Tasamma, the current Prosperity Party Oromia branch head, and how he spoke about, in reference to OLA, he said, you know, the only way to deal with a fish is by drying the pond. And by that, he was referring to how total displacement and eviction of the Oromo is the only way, which tallies with the objective of the Amara vigilantes and the Fano, and which is what they've done. And the example is they cleared all civilians from Kiramu district. Imagine clearing all civilians from a district, clearing all 12 kabeles in Gidda that border with Kiramu. And still, nearly 50,000 people are residing as internally displaced people in Gidda Yana district. And on top of all that, these are unreported, underreported international media. So it is really a sad case of perpetual conflict against the Oromo going on in that region. And they have, their names have, as I said, metamorphosed over time, but with a singularity of objective. The objective remained the same.
Okay.
That's what I would say for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that response. Next, we will move to take a question in the chat. It was directed to Medga. I'll just sum it up. I think you read it yourself, but the question in the chat asked, generally, when you're speaking of militias who are conducting ID checks, who are those militias? And how does this relate to other types of police checks? So go ahead, Medga.
Yeah, thank you, Roberta, for the question. I am referring to the recently established Gachana Surna, or maybe we can say the guardians of the system. When I say this, other security forces are, I'm not saying that other security forces are not violating human rights. They do, but I want to emphasize on Gachana Surna because there are many in number, and many of them has no clue about human rights issues. They do not take any trainings, so they can detain you or arrest you on the way simply by looking at your appearance, or if you maybe they can say your hair is a bit longer, so you look like Shane, so you should be arrested. This is what they say. And on the way, if they find you, they search your phone and your person and everything. So that is what I am referring. I'm referring to specifically to the Gachana Surna, or the recently established security forces. And to the other question is about the legal action. Yeah, I don't know. We have all the laws. I don't see any problems in the law. Ethiopia is party to many of the international treaties. The problem is not with the law. It is with the institution, with the structure of the state itself, as Abane said. So I think struggling and organizing yourself in a group, or in form of civil society organization, or in a political party, and maybe changing the system, as I suggested, in form of referendum, or via transitional political transition, can be the solution. That is what I can say for. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We had 2 comments in person. Did you still have a comment, or? Okay.
Thank you very much, everybody. I have just 2 comments. One comment is on who Walaga belongs to Amara, and the statement made by Major Dawit. You know, the Oromo know that Walaga has never been part of Amara land, or it was not. The Amaras were not settled there before Menelik came and occupied the Oromo country. Historically, the Amara, after they have overthrown the Zagwe dynasty, extended south, but were driven back in the 16th century across the Nile. They were not, they did not occupy that part of Ethiopia, Walaga, for example. They have come into, you know, along the Rift Valley and extended south, and they were driven back. In 1869, I guess, they came back through Walaga, across the Nile, and were driven back from Gudru. That is historically recorded. They have never been in that area. What Daud is talking about is, of course, after Menelik, people have come and settled there. Not many, but Nabtanya have settled there in Gudru. Then workers were coming to that area, farmers cross over and work for the Oromo. That was true, that there were settlers, a few settlers. And then when the drought came, people were settled in Walaga and among others in Guduru. And they were settled Siksaga, that was mingling the Oromo and the settlers. A Safara group settlement, and that's what happened. That happened after the 1974 famine, but in the 1980s. That happened. And Dawit was the head of RRC, Relevant Rehabilitation Commission. He's one of those who put in the beginning settlers in that area. I was working for the RRC, by the way. I had high positions at RRC. So I know what happened then. And those people were settled then. Today they are victims. Not from the Oromo, but because from outside they are saying, well, guys, ours, conflict is happening there. With, instigating the conflict, we don't know exactly. Who is dying, we don't know exactly. But the Oromos are dying, Amaras are dying perhaps, but people who came from Wallo are dying, and the Oromos are being evicted. That is what happened. The other point I want to make is about this Galagadai. Galagadai is a word, is a boasting word for Amara warriors historically. Those who killed them, Oromo, it means Oromo killers. What happened was when Kadu, the Chilalo, Kadu, what is that called, the Swedish project there? Development. Haile Selassie went there to inaugurate. Bitootessa was the secretary of the territorial administration. I know him. I met him after they went to Kadu and came back, and he was telling us. And Taddese Taye was from Wallaga. He was also he was Auraja administrator of Kadu. He was in Wallaga, born in Arjo, and he was administrator. And people were coming in front of Haile Selassie and saying, boasting, Gala Gadai, Gala Gadai. Haile Selassie was really astonished, not astonished, but he was disappointed. And that is what I heard after that happened. So Gala Gadai means, historically, those who kill Gala, you can kill Gala. It's just like you have killed an elephant or a lion, and then you go out and boast. That is the story. I want just to make this clear for people because it is not clear.
Thank you so much for that rich context. So we'll just take a pause. We have one more in-person question. So if the panelists would like to respond to Obumakuria's comment, just keep your thoughts for 1 minute, and we'll take one more question here from the audience.
My name is Gerd Decke. I was the successor of Gunnar Hasselblad as Secretary for the Horn of Africa here in the Berlin Mission, just around the corner. I'm glad to be here today. And my question is to the pressure on the Oromo in Oromia by the Amhara and maybe by other people too in other areas. What is the policy, the federal structure that was created in 91, 92, meant also that in the Oromia region, people would speak the Oromo language, everything from school to public presentations to courts, etc. to administration would be in the Oromo language. Now, when Amharas are pressing into Oromia, do they in fact come with their Amhara language, and the Oromo language in that area where they live is no longer the dominant language? That would be against the federal structure. Is the 1991-92 federal structure still valid, or is it completely erased through the pressure for a unitarian new system? Officially not. What's the situation?
Thank you so much for that question. Which panelists would like to begin? Please feel free.
I can begin, if I may. Very good question. Again, thank you. As you rightly noted, officially the 1991 multilingual, multi-ethno-national based federal arrangement is still there, at least on paper. The problem remains one of implementing according to the state laws. The successive rulers in Oromia region suffer from what I call, or what some scholars call, politics of appeasement, to trying to play to the tunes of the unitarist Ethiopianist group, so that they are not offended. When the Amhara, even the illegal settlers come to Oromia territories, including, for instance, in Western Oromia, actually there are no evidences to present otherwise. They come only with their language and culture. And for instance, in Gidayana, the district tried their best to accommodate them, even with their language. So as I tried to indicate in my presentation, there are 5 primary schools where it is only Amharic language taught schools. And this is not even discussed at the national level when they speak about, okay, in Oromia, they don't allow for, Amhara settlers to use their own language, which is not true, to be honest. At the region level, there are more than 300 schools where Amharic is the only language in instruction. So just to come back to your point, when they come with only their language. And this may not be representative of the whole Amhara population residing in Oromia, but for the illegal settlers, this has been the case, particularly in Western Oromia. And a part of the fault line has been between this seemingly a clash between the two, them failing to integrate into the local population is an issue. And I think part of my policy recommendation is for at least legal settlers residing in Oromia, residing in Western Oromia in particular, there has to be a motion to teach them Oromo values, Oromo language, Oromo worldview. Illegally occupying a territory is very alien to Oromo worldview. If we teach Oromo values, Oromo worldview, I think that could be one way of resolving the conflict itself. That's what I would say for now. Thank you.
Maybe Murga, if you want to go, please go ahead. Otherwise, okay. So what I would quickly add is, yes, the 1991 Constitution in the ethno-lingual federal structure is an improvement for sure, an improvement that is realized by the struggle of the Oromo people, but also other nations and nationalities of Ethiopia. And if we look at the majority of the nation's nationalities, they are not against that structure. Rather, the opposition against that structure comes from one group who were at the dominant position for quite a long time. And that's what is causing a problem. Now, with the new regime coming, not new really, with the Prosperity Party coming to power, what is happening is the tendency to play kind of gamble between the two, while at the same time showing that here we have the ethno-lingual federal structure in place, but then at the same time working to disrupt that system, somehow aids and creates this grievance by the larger nation and nationalities of Ethiopia, because this is a result of their struggle and their demand that came to reality. Now, is this still in place? At least on paper, yes, it is. The Constitution is still there. But then what I would like to link to this is often we don't speak about the capacity, the capability of people accessing the right that is recognized, accessing the resource that is in place. Rather, we simply take for granted if a certain right, if a certain system is or institution is established, then we think that is the solution. We think that is an end, but that is a minimalist. And for that matter, I would even call it as essentialist approach, because that is just a means, that is not an end. And that is what is, in my opinion, causing a problem. And so what I would argue, for example, Amartya Sen, Helen Nussbaum, they speak about people's and human capability. We need a law and institution so that people can live a life of their choice, can realize their fullest potential by accessing and making use of resources and laws and institutions in place. If people are restricted, denied an access to this, having the law and a system in place will not be of any help. And I think what is lacking in Ethiopia for quite a while is that those rights are recognized. Now people can speak with their language, they can learn by their mother tongue, which is great. But then to what extent are they able to realize that to the fullest extent? That is one question. And I think that's where the problem lies. And the other two element is this thinking of state-centrism, not only a problem in Ethiopia, but thinking the state as a center of the solution, thinking the state as the ultimate provider of a solution, even at the international level. And this has to do with the post-Westphalian state structure that we have, which is crafted in the Western world. The state is at the center and people are dependent on that. And the line between people and state is often blurred, and it's often even seen as one and the same, which is not the case, because people can be and often are victims of the state, which is supposed to be the protector. And I think this, I guess, like an intersection and a combination and cumulative effect of all this factor makes it a bit less relevant having the law by itself, as far as people are not having a meaningful control over the right they have and the resource. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So just to remind our participants from Zoom, unfortunately, we will take questions from the chat. So we were hoping for you to write your questions out so we could take them that way, just as a reminder. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today. Thank you so much to these wonderful panelists for these really rich and detailed responses. Thank you to everyone in person, and we will have more time tomorrow for more discussion. So if you had a burning question today, please keep it in mind, and we can try to find some time to discuss more tomorrow. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you, Galatoma.